A lot of the time in gut health, we're focusing on what can we take out of our diet. Where most of my clients, they need to actually be adding things to their diet.
Food intolerance testing, where do you stand on that?
Oh, it's absolute BS. People go in to get these tests, they're desperate. They want advice, they want answers. And the tests they're getting are completely inaccurate. Like if I was to advise this, I'd lose my license. That's how bad it is.
Wow. What percentage of the people that you've generally seen, is it a case of the ingredients that are going in versus lifestyle?
I would say 80% lifestyle and 20% food. What happens is when you are stressed, your body goes into what we call fight or flight response. Your body's making adaptations and unfortunately that negatively impacts your gut to create pain, bloating, even loose stools. And for some people, it can even cause constipation as well. And then longer term, it does actually impact the microbiota, so the gut bacteria and other things living in the gut. So long time after the stress has passed, your digestion just isn't the same as it was.
Sleep more and you'll fart less.
Yep. Summarized after
Maybe
an hour.
we could title this show that. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the InnerFight Podcast. My name's Marcus Smith. I'm your host, and I thank you for being here today with me. This is a little bit of a personal question. Do you have problems with your digestive system? Is your stool, or should we just get friendly and call it poo, a little bit inconsistent? Does it smell some days pretty gross and other days not so gross? Is it different in color? They're probably questions that you've not really been asked very often, or you probably don't even ask yourself very often. However, they are signs as to what's going on in your gut. A number of us suffer from gut issues, and namely, which we're going to talk about a lot today, IBS, Irritable Bowel Syndrome, without even knowing about it. There can be a number of different factors that are causing our poops to come out the way they do. They could be what we're eating, and they could be, which is a lot of factors, and they also could be the way that we're living our lives. Our digestive system is one of the most complex systems probably on the planet, from not only the moment that the food goes into the mouth, but way before that, as our senses are aroused. Some of you might have heard of Pavlov's dog, the experiment where they rang the bell before they were going to feed the dogs, and then the dogs started to salivate. Through smell, through noise, and also through what we see, maybe a long time before we actually eat, the digestive process starts, and it doesn't finish until that little pop comes out of our bum. And it's still going, and it's going the whole time. There are a number of things we can do to make it a smoother process, and we don't need to suffer. We don't need to have extreme amounts of wind. We don't need to have extreme smells, or from not such a good one to a really gross one. Most poop smells, by the way. We don't need to have a different experience every time we go to the bathroom, but many of us do. So I figured we'd get someone on the show to talk all about it who definitely knows way more than I do. This week's show announcements. It is Eid here in the Middle East next week. However, that doesn't stop us from getting fitter, drinking more coffee, having acai bowls, and having a good time. Therefore, our schedule is not the same, but similar. Classes start Monday through Friday, 6:30 in the morning, 6:30, 7:30, 8:30, specialty classes at 9:30. However, we will be relaxing in the afternoon. So don't come for a workout in the afternoon because no one will be here and you have to do it in the car park, and that's not very comfortable for most people. Endurance schedule remains the same. Monday morning at Nadal Sheba, Tuesday morning at the track at Sports City. Wednesday, they have taken their Wednesday ride indoors. Globally, no matter where you are, you can ride with them on a Wednesday. Reach out to endurance@innerfight.com if you want to get involved in their Wednesday ride. If you are in the UK, or if you are further west from us, you'll have to get up a little bit earlier because they start at 5:59 if you want to join them live. However, if you're east from us, that could work very nicely. Thursday, they do strength. Friday, they run at the beach. And there is also, starting not this weekend, but next weekend, the 23rd, a Sunday run coming. which is pretty cool. So yes, there is a great schedule for Eid. You can get fit, and the coffee shop, the cafe, Smith Street Cafe, is open as normal every single day. However, they will open an hour later. Instead of just after 5, they'll open just after 6. If you're an early bird, come and see them. What else is going on that you need to put in your diary? Dates for your diary the following week. There'll be no show announcements next week because I shall not be here. The following week, it is Hell Week. It begins on Monday, the 24th of June. 1 week of epic, very hard workouts. If you complete it properly, don't cheat, you'll have your name in the Hall of Fame. 24th, 5 days, Hell Week. People love it. It is all on. As I just mentioned, next week I shall be away at a race in Kenya, migration gravel race. So there will be no show announcements, but you'll be okay. I still have a guest. There will still be a show, and hopefully you will still have a fantastic week. That's it for this week's show announcements. Let's get into the show. This is episode number 912 of the InnerFight Podcast with Kirsten Jackson. No matter where you are in the world, thanks a lot for tuning in. Let's jump into today's show. Let's kick it off then. Let's get right in at the deep end. What is the biggest issue we are facing when it comes to food?
When it comes to food, so many to pick from. Probably that we are over-analysing our food, if anything, and actually we're not looking at sort of some of the obvious areas is what I would say. So a lot of people are looking for the next diet, quick fix, supplement, and then they're out at the weekend partying all night or doing other things, or they're sleeping 4 hours a night and wondering why they're not achieving their health goals, is what I would say.
So it's not actually the food at all. No, it's everything else.
Exactly. So everything in balance, but definitely we're looking for that. I think that quick fix is the issue.
You are what I would say a specialist, guru focused on IBS. Talk to us, what is it?
Yeah, so I'm glad you've asked this question because I think we use the term IBS all the time just when someone has a bit of a funny tummy or a bit of stomach pain, but it's genuinely a real condition that's diagnosable. What the condition is irritable bowel syndrome, and it's considered a disorder of the gut-brain axis. So what that means is the brain and the gut, they like to talk to each other. The gut speaks to the brain speaks to the gut. So for example, if you've ever felt nervous about a situation or even excited, you might see that you've got butterflies in your tummy. That's the brain and the gut talking to each other. But in IBS, those pathways that talk to each other don't work properly. So you might be eating a relatively normal, even healthy kind of meal, and then you end up with experiencing pain, diarrhea, or constipation from it. You might experience a little bit of stress in your day, so being slightly late to work, for example, and then the next day you get digestive symptoms. So a really sensitive gut to like multiple situations.
Are we born with, you mentioned something quite interesting there, the gut and the brain talking to each other. Are we born with a disconnection?
We don't know. So this is the problem with IBS. There's lots of scenarios which we know lead to the onset of it. So things like it can be genetics potentially, because we see that it tends to run in families. So potentially there is that element, someone's born with it, but also someone can get it after things like antibiotic use, which suggests that actually their gut might have been okay before that. But equally, not everybody who has antibiotics ends up with IBS. So maybe it's a combination of things as well. So we're not sure.
How did you get into it?
Good question. So I actually have always liked nutrition in general, and probably being very privileged in the UK, in the group of friends I was in, everyone was going to uni. I thought, nutrition sounds good. And so I did fall into becoming a dietitian. And it wasn't until I was actually qualified, I actually then started getting digestive problems myself.
Oh, wow.
It was interesting. Obviously not a very nice experience, but it was ironic, I think, at the time, because technically I had the knowledge to get out of that situation. I knew about probiotics, I knew how to read science, I knew about the different diets, etc. And yet nothing that I tried seemed to work or work enough. Yeah. And I think it was only at that stage, as being a dietitian, embarrassingly, at the time, I understood like how hard it was for people to get through this. And actually we needed to approach that science a little bit differently rather than just a one-size-fits-all approach.
It's tough, isn't it? Because like you said, to my first question, is a bit of a minefield for people, and then there's people like you that have chosen the route that you're in. We've chosen the route that we're in to try and debunk really what's going on, and there are so many variables.
Exactly. And where do you start? So people do feel quite overwhelmed.
Let's try and make it simple. Someone has a bad gut. Where do they, like, what is a bad gut?
Exactly, because it's not really something we talk about, is it? You know, you don't talk to your friend about how often you go to the toilet, if you're a bit bloated. It's just not, it's a real taboo subject. So what I would say to anyone is if you think you might have it, don't sit there and think, oh, maybe it's good, maybe it's normal or not. Just go straight to your doctor. They won't laugh at you. That, you know, the queries that they get day to day, this is nothing, you know, compared to what they've seen. Because the issue with having a bad gut, of course, is might be IBS, but it could also be really serious conditions, like things like even bowel cancer. And if we could get that early, that makes a huge difference. So first things first, anyone that's sitting listening to this, if you think you've got a bad gut, just go to your doctor and get some tests to rule out other conditions first. Then if you've got that IBS, that's when we can then start to specifically manage it with IBS related kind of managements that we know work.
What shows up then? If you're to go to a doctor and you say, like, I don't know, like you said, we generally don't speak about it too much, which is wrong, but it's like, what's the consistency of my poo, color-wise, consistency, smell, like all of these things. So you explain it to your doctor. What would a doctor do? Would they do some blood tests, or what's the procedure?
Yeah, so it's multiple things. So the assessment's really important. I think that's what often gets overlooked about how knowledgeable a doctor is. They are asking you multiple questions. It's not just about doing tests. So they will want to know things like how often do you go to the toilet? Anything less than open your bowels, going for a poo, less than once a day is abnormal. And then anything up to 3 times a day is pretty normal. The consistency. So if anyone wants to look, you can Google the Bristol stool chart, and it's lovely images of poo, and you can see exactly what it should look like. So it should be a number 4, which is like a sausage, like all formed.
Yeah.
And if it's not, again, that's an indication it's abnormal. They might ask you about things like family history as well to see what conditions maybe run that are genetic, and that would then indicate what tests they need to do. But there are some basic tests that they would do. So one of them is actually taking a sample of your poo to look for microscopic levels of blood, which would indicate bowel cancer, the need to then go on for colonoscopy, and also something called fecal calprotectin, which looks for inflammatory bowel disease. And then there's a whole host of blood tests that they would do. And often this is not very well communicated because they just take one vial of blood. So you think you've just had one test, but actually there's multiple tests done, where they look for just general information, which would then indicate you need further tests done. But also things like your thyroid levels, because thyroid function can change, and that can cause digestive issues. And then celiac disease. So celiac disease is a really common autoimmune condition, which is where we react to gluten. And that can cause digestive problems. So really it's ruling out multiple other conditions at that stage. If for ladies, if you have any issues around fertility or actually your periods, for example, and your cycles, they will also do an ultrasound scan just to rule out sort of ovarian cancers, which can show up like these symptoms as well. So not a straightforward answer, unfortunately, but there is multiple tests, and the absolute minimum you should be having is those blood tests. If anyone's interested, for the NICE guidelines online, and that will tell you which test should be done, and stool test, minimum.
I remember once having a 4-day stool test, which was quite an arduous task. Had to collect stool for 4 days. I had some gut problems, and they wanted it across, and it's not that easy. Like I think that's probably why it puts a few people off as well, because people are like, "Oh, this is actually a nightmare." And
yeah, quite embarrassing as well, isn't it? You know, I remember the first time I had to do a stool test, and they were just so blasé. They're like, "Just go and put it in this like tube." You're thinking, "What? I'm not going to do this." And then they're just like, "Leave it just on the counter." You think, "Oh, no way." It's embarrassing, but I think because in healthcare it's just so blasé. It's literally like looking at the color of someone's hair. They do not
of course.
care. But for us, maybe not so normal.
It's right though. You said it before. It's a little bit taboo. I don't know. I don't know why, because we all know that if there's inconsistency, or we've all felt if there's inconsistency that's coming out, then we're probably not feeling great.
Exactly.
So it's like, why are we? Have you looked at like the psychological side of it?
Yeah, so I think it comes from culture, to be honest. So it's how we're brought up. And if you look at mental health, for example, that's still a taboo subject, but things are starting to change on that front. And it's really coming from, I guess, thought leaders, influencers online open up about it. So culturally, it's starting to become normal. Doctors are getting better training. So they are opening the conversations with their patients and things like that. So I think it does come from a culture, because I remember even when I went to school, it was very much, I remember thinking, oh, girls don't poo. That's what I remember what I was told. And now that seems so stupid, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But at the time, or you wouldn't want to go for a poo when you were at school or at work in case someone knew. Well, I think we all know everybody goes, so why do we care? And then you're thinking, oh, what about the smell? Well, no one smells good. So it was just a really weird, but definitely just cultural norms that we kind of grow up with.
It's so funny you say that. I have a friend who I lived with at uni, and still to this day, he won't poo in public places. He'll only poo at home.
Exactly.
I don't know if that's some kind of childhood sort of, I don't know, behavior, but
it's interesting. One of a big factor, and I think you mentioned it, is stress. Talk to us a little bit about stress and how that can affect the gut.
Yeah, absolutely. So stress, I guess you can kind of categorize it into two ways. So number one, you can go traumatic stress. So maybe a bereavement, someone close to you, something happens. And we often see then gut problems are triggered after that event. So you can almost date it back. I'll often say to clients, oh, when did your symptoms start? And they'll say, oh, after my father passed away or something traumatic.
Really?
Yeah. And it's really quite a stark difference. Or it can just be built up over time. So a lot of my clients will be people who are, I'd say, quite high functioning in that they do lots of stuff in their day, got lots packed in, which is great. But I don't think they've realised the impact the stress running from one appointment to the next has had on them, that it's almost become normal. And it's only when you you even say to them, how stressed are you? And they'll say, oh, no, I'm okay. Sometimes I get a bit stressed, but really my life is good. That's kind of irrelevant. It's about how you feel. But then you start to see they're drinking maybe 4 litres of water a day because their mouth is always dry, which is a sign of stress. They can't sleep at night. There's a sign of stress. I can't concentrate on things. And all these elements, they can impact the gut, because what happens is when you are stressed, your body goes into what we call fight or flight response, which some people may be familiar with. But basically it's an inbuilt response, which is great when someone's attacking you in the street and you need to run away or fight them. But actually when you're just stressed because you've got a work deadline or you've got to get your kid to school on time, your body's making adaptations. And unfortunately that negatively impacts your gut to create pain, bloating, even loose stools. And for some people, it can even cause constipation as well. And then longer term, it does actually impact the microbiota. So the gut bacteria and other things living in the gut, it changes that. So long term, long time after the stress has passed, your digestion just isn't the same as it was.
The old nervous poo before a sports event or before a big event is probably, everyone's probably heard of it, but no one really links it back to, or not being able to go, having a little bit of stage fright when with us, we coach a lot of endurance guys. If you don't go before you're going to do a marathon or an Ironman,
guaranteed,
it could be a bit of a problem, especially if you've got a wetsuit on. But why do you think it is that people don't link stress with the gut?
I think they just don't think. I think the gut is always just linked to food, isn't it? So I think I recently had a client who actually made a complaint to me. We'd been working together for 3 months, and I said, oh, so are you happy with, and they had no symptoms at this point. So I was expecting yes, thank you so much, you've changed my life, because the symptoms were horrendous. And they said, to be honest, I'm just a bit disappointed that we've not really clarified what dietary issues I have. I said, what do you mean? Because there's no foods that I have triggers to. And that's because she changed her lifestyle so much that actually her gut was functioning much better. So she could now eat a wide range of foods with no symptoms. Before, she wasn't sleeping properly, her stress was really bad. So it can really impact it so much. And people just don't realise. They just think it must be my diet because that's what I'm putting into my gut. They don't understand the gut on the higher level.
That's where we come into a couple of issues, isn't it? Because you have some gut issues, you go and see a doctor, you get diagnosed on what the doctor sees, either on the test that you spoke about or on what's been told, I'm interested to get your thoughts on intolerance tests, but I'll come to that question in a second. And then you start to make changes to diet, but actually what you've just said there, it could just be lifestyle. So you haven't had to tune this client's diet, but you've maybe unbeknown to her, but your angle has been more lifestyle changes and her gut issues have completely disappeared.
Exactly. And sometimes even to the point when you start working with someone and they do have intolerances to foods, and then actually when their gut starts to function better, they go.
It's crazy.
Yeah. And isn't that much better to approach actually getting enough sleep, managing stress, and being able to then eat relatively what you want? That, to me, that's a better outcome.
So much better. What do you think about our relationship with food? If you compare it to, I mean, you've been over here for 7 years, you've been in this industry for longer. How's people's relationship with food changing?
So people's relationship with food is changing, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse, I would say. I do think we are getting more health information than ever. We have access to social media. We have probably better healthcare access. We've got doctors online and things like this now, and we have got, so therefore, my one video can reach thousands of people. But the issue is that information is not very censored. So often the algorithm, if you start looking, for example, lots of diet information, that algorithm on Instagram is going to hit you with more and more of that. So you might be getting your information from an influencer who has got a completely different body shape to you, no qualifications in nutrition, and actually they're creating more like a disordered eating.
I was going to say, who's full of shit.
Yeah, exactly, pretty much. And so it is frustrating because a lot of the clients I see are actually, they've almost got this level of disordered eating. So not so much anorexia or bulimia, which would be an eating disorder, but they've become really quite extreme in their views. But again, not everybody. We know we've still got an obesity crisis. We know things like type 2 diabetes is going up. So it's not everyone, but I think the ones that are wanting to do something about their health are maybe not always getting the best access to information is the issue.
Yeah, it's tricky. I feel like we may be entering into an era of information overload, aren't we?
Exactly.
Like people will go to a doctor or people will listen to this and I would imagine that even though you and I are the ultimate authority on this, obviously, but they'll listen to what we're saying, something will resonate, and then they'll go and Google it, ask 3 or 4 people, maybe even go and see someone else about it before they actually action what we've said, which again has positives and has negatives, but we're almost in a little bit of an overload stage.
And also that you've got the doctor factor in that. So a lot of people obviously put doctors on a pinnacle in terms of right at the top about where they're going to get the information from. But the average doctor has got 1 to 2 hours of nutrition training on, I think, like a 7 or 8 year degree, is it? So, I mean, I often help doctors with their gut health, and the young ones, bless them, they'll come in and they know where their limits are, and they'll say, I don't know what to do, I don't get any can you help me? But a lot of my clients are going to doctors, asking them for nutrition training, nutrition advice, getting awful advice and walking away thinking, but the doctor told me that.
If we rewind a bit, if someone's going to see a doctor for whether they know they have IBS or they just haven't, let's just say that their poo's not good, not all good. We've got some problems. What sort of person should they be seeking out?
So a family medicine doctor or GP to start with, just because they're the ones that are going to do a general assessment for you. So they're not less qualified than a consultant, which I think some people think. They're almost a consultant in general medicine. Yeah. They're the best people to see, and they will ask you loads of different questions. And then after you get your diagnosis, whether you need to go on for further testing, then they will refer you on to a gastro. Most people don't need that. But if you want to then get your management, it would be from a dietitian. So the diagnosis part comes from the doctor, then the management comes from a dietitian.
Wow, yeah. Quite the process. Let's go there then. Food intolerance testing. Where do you stand on that?
Oh, it's absolute BS. It is awful. I actually can't believe it's legal, and not just here, like everywhere. There's no country to my knowledge where it's illegal, but it's honestly like saying to someone, come in, spend 3,000 dirhams, £600, stand on your head. If you can only do 3 minutes, that means you can't eat gluten. If you can do 6 minutes, that means you can't eat chocolate. It is that random.
Yeah.
And it's just crazy. And the more money people seem to charge and the more sciencey it sounds, it does sound realistic. But it is frustrating because essentially people go in to get these tests are desperate. They want advice, they want answers. And the tests they're getting are completely inaccurate. Like if I was to advise this, I'd lose my license. That's how bad it is.
Wow. So anyone who's following and they go from kind of all different price points, don't they?
Yes.
And like you can do one online, send your stuff back, $50 all the way up to a serious amount of money.
Yeah, exactly. And not one of them is accurate, but it is really frustrating. So if anyone is listening to this, in the kindness, don't feel like, I've been scammed. And interestingly, there's actually some research on IBS to show that there's a 50% placebo effect. So you might see even reviews going, this changed my life, or it's very accurate, I feel so much better. But a lot of the time, either it's placebo or actually you've taken so many different foods out of your diet that it's somewhere in there, just by chance, it is actually one of the foods you do react to. Or maybe your diet's just got a lot healthier because you're reading packaging, you're not eating any processed foods because you can't, because you're on this restrictive diet. But there's no scientific basis, not even a theory behind them.
We kind of, as humans, we don't like to be told not to do something.
Yes.
We don't like to be restricted. So when people say remove such and such, everyone's like, psychologically, all you're thinking about is I can't have nuts anymore, or I can't have eggs anymore, or whatever it is. It's do you think, what percentage of the people that you've generally seen, is it a case of the ingredients that are going in versus what you said before, lifestyle?
I would say 80% lifestyle, 20% food.
Wow.
And that's the sort of process I work with clients. And that's why I say to them, I can't work with you and do a one-off consultation. It's a 3-month process. And we start off by changing their diet, because otherwise they're not going to get symptom improvements. And then it's very much lifestyle consistency, and then bringing foods back in. Yeah, it's a stark difference. And that's what kind of makes me worry, because online, as soon as you put IBS diet, it's got some of the diets, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute. And they will do work really well, but they're only designed to be for a very short period of time.
Talk to us a little bit in more depth. It's a great book. It's quite old now. I think it was called Gut, Julia Enders. Yeah. Talk to us a little bit about the role of the gut. Because there's a lot of different moving parts to our digestive system, which I don't think people fully understand or probably have no need to understand at all. So tell us a little bit how it actually works.
Yes, where to start with that?
Yeah.
It's,
goes in your mouth. Yeah.
Exactly. It's nice to just eat and then not think about it, but there's so many different moving parts, and it's good to actually have a good understanding, because I think a lot of the myths come from not understanding how the gut works. But your first point of contact when you're actually eating something is actually just smell. So when you start smelling something, you see it, you actually produce more saliva. Saliva actually contains enzymes, so even just that visual process is already starting it off. You then got your chewing. A lot of us don't chew enough. So if you're expecting your gut to work and you're not even chewing your food properly, it's probably not going to work out. So you're chewing your food, then going down your esophagus, which is windpipe, your throat, in other words, into your stomach, which is a pit of acid designed to kill bacteria, which makes me laugh because people always talk about changing the acid levels in their body, and you're like, we don't really want to always do that. And then after your stomach, you've got your small bowel, which is around 9 meters long, which varies depending on each person, but imagine that's all packed up inside there. That's where all of your vitamins and other elements get mostly absorbed. And then you've got the bit right at the end of your gut, your large bowel, which is mostly just there to reabsorb fluid, but it's also the bit where you've got all your good gut bacteria and yeasts and fungi, which is your microbiota, and then you go for a poo. So lots of different things that function, but if you can appreciate if one of those parts is maybe not working properly, then it can then affect other elements. So for example, if you look at, I won't go off on a tangent too much here, but if you look at lactose intolerance, so lactase, the enzyme that breaks down lactose, is produced in the small bowel. So what happens if you don't produce enough of this enzyme, your lactose goes undigested into the next part of the bowel, your large bowel. Suddenly your body starts panicking, there's too much lactose in here, I need to dilute it, draws in loads of water, you end up with diarrhea. So it all is connected, and it's important to have not an in-depth understanding. We don't all need to be experts, but it's a general idea.
Are you happy with people having dairy?
Yes and no. So I think like there's many different factors with it is what I would say. So like it depends on someone's, financial status as well. I think we often gets overlooked, and also ethical reasons. So for ethical reasons, I personally wouldn't consume dairy because of the impact it has on the world and things like that. But food wise, it really depends on if they have a lactose intolerance or not. That's what it comes down to.
A lot of people do.
Yes, I know.
Why do so many people have an intolerance?
So lactose intolerance is really, really common. So in dairy, there's a few different elements which can be poorly digested or people might have issues with. So you have the cow's milk protein, and then you have a carbohydrate, which is the lactose. So to have a cow's milk protein allergy is pretty rare. It's mostly in children, and children typically grow out of it as they get older. So that to have a genuine allergy where you can't have a single bit at all without having some sort of inflammatory response is quite rare. Lactose intolerance, though, is very common, and that's because as we get older, we produce less of the lactase, the enzyme to break it down. So some of the arguments are therefore we shouldn't really be having another animal's milk when we're not even babies ourselves and taking it from another animal. So I do understand those arguments. Interestingly, in Caucasians, we actually have a gene defect which allows us to have dairy or lactose longer. So we actually end up producing lactase for a lot longer compared to an Asian population or an African, somebody with genes from those different. So it gets quite interesting that way. But nutrition-wise, from what I can see from the research, it really comes down to whether you can tolerate it or not. However, I do think there's a bigger conversation to be said about, the environmental impacts of that and ethical impacts of that as well.
It's interesting, isn't it?
It's tricky.
Yeah, I mean, I'm much in your camp, more on the fact that lactase we stop producing so much for a reason. And I also think back to when I was a child and they delivered the milk bottles.
Yes.
I'm very old. They deliver the milk bottles, and literally a day to 2 days later, the fridge would just stink because the milk would now be off.
Yes.
Whereas now, you get milk that lasts for like 10 days.
Yep.
And I'm like, yeah, that's not going inside me.
Yeah, there is different types of milk though, is what I'd say. You can get, obviously, the main reasons we brought in pasteurization. So that's why it lasts longer, but 10 days, it's a bit like if anyone's ever made their own bread. Whenever you make your own bread, it actually goes stale within about 2 days maximum, because then we used to use breadcrumbs. I remember back in the day, my mum would keep it, and now it just stays for, I don't know. I remember forgetting that we had some back in the day in our cupboard, and it was there like 14 days later. And there's slight mold on it, and that's, you think, and there is something like, I can't remember the exact number in bread, but there's something like, this is UK, so I don't know if it's different here, something like 9 or 10 ingredients, maybe more, that aren't even on the label because they're considered part of the processing.
Yeah.
So there is a lot of things going on, but it comes back to that, is it bad in the overall diet or not? Individual, there's so many different factors in nutrition, unfortunately.
Gut microbiome, gut acid that you spoke about, the enzymes that break down the food they have a huge role for us. Talk to us a little bit about it, and also what we're doing maybe right and maybe what we're doing wrong when it comes to gut microbiome.
Yeah. So I can tell you what we're doing wrong first, even though I sound like the food police now as a dietitian.
That's good.
I think dietitians, we get a bad reputation, don't we? Of like going around telling people, don't do this, don't do that. But what we're doing wrong is quite easy to resolve. So what we're doing wrong is 2 things. I think all this research has come out on the microbiome, which is super exciting. It's a really interesting new area to, explore. Well, if you're a geek like me, it's exciting anyway. But the problem is we don't know a lot yet about what is a normal microbiome. So a lot of people who are wanting to do something about their health are really like trying to focus on this too much. And some people are doing like microbiome testing, for example, which at the minute is pretty useless because we don't know where we're trying to move our health to, if that makes sense. So I would save your money on that one. So consider your microbiome, but not in loads of detail. So in terms of what we need to be doing, and this is where an easier thing to resolve is, there was a really interesting study called the American Gut Project. I don't know if you've heard of it at all. So it's, again, interesting to me, maybe not someone else. But they studied thousands and thousands of people's poo to see what the optimal amount in their diet was, to look at diet and microbiome relationships. And they found that having 30 grams of fiber per day and also 30 different plants per week was the optimal amount in terms of what we call microbiome variety. So when you look at in the microbiome, we often use this word, we don't really understand what it means, is there's lots of live different organisms, so different types of bacteria, yeast, fungi, they all play a role. And if we have a good variety, that's been linked to reduction in inflammatory conditions, even dementia, mental health. So that's what we're trying to do, have a good variety. And that comes from having all these different plants in our diet. So again, a lot of the time in gut health, we're focusing on what can we take out of our diet. Where most of my clients, they need to actually be adding things to their diet. So if you are somebody who has, you're just having a lot of protein, it's not necessarily the protein's the issue, but maybe you need to be adding that side salad in, or adding, some vegetables to it, having something extra into your diet and looking at the variety. And definitely coming from a British culture, I'm half Irish as well, it is very much, there's no spices in there, there's no flavorings, the veg is very, very bland, it's the same thing over and over again. Whereas when you look at other cultures, their food is much more varied. So variety is key, is what I would say when it comes to diet.
In Johann Hari's new book, Magic Pill, which is all about Ozempic, part of his journey, he went to Japan, where he took last year, I think it was last year or the previous year, Tim Spector spoke a lot about the 30 different plants a week. And Johann Hari found in Japan that they use up to 60, which that's a shit ton. But actually, it's funny, Holly, my wife, and I do it quite a lot. We just add up how many different plants we're having. And guys, if you want to do this, it's quite good fun if you're a nerd. But it's like, because coffee counts as a plant and chocolate actually counts as a plant as well. So you can actually but you're absolutely right. Our variety of plant-based food is probably in decline, which is a problem.
Absolutely. It's something that can be easily resolved, but we're just not, making the effort to do it. I'm not sure what's wrong.
I agree with you. I think effort's the right way, and processed food is faster and more convenient, therefore takes less effort. And I think it's interesting what you said about gut microbiome, because correct me if I'm wrong, but the digestive process actually begins with what you said. It's visual as well as a smell. So it's two of our senses at once. I'm not sure if it's hearing yet, but it's definitely, if mum says dinner's ready, you might start to salivate, old Pavlov's dog. Yeah, it probably is. And that's the point in which your digestive system starts to work, right?
Yes, exactly.
This is one of the other problems with apps like Deliveroo. There isn't actually not that getting food should be a struggle, but the whole process of smelling it, thinking about it, seeing it, get exciting about it, and the various things that causes in the body, God knows what the medical term for that is, processes that causes in the body, they don't happen.
Yeah. Potentially, yes. And often when we're getting it, what are we doing? Sitting on our phone, watching TV, trying to catch up on Netflix, whatever. We're not even thinking about the amount we're eating, the flavors, anything. So many of the processes are kind of being blocked.
We're heading in a bad direction. Generally, aren't we? It's very tough. And I think that obviously the other thing that comes with sitting down, like when I was younger, to sit in front of the TV, like TV dinner was like the ultimate treat. Yeah. Now a lot of people don't even have a dining table.
No, so my mum was really old school. My dad was like ex-military, ex-police, so that was never happening. It was at the table. And my mum was actually a trained chef. And so what we were saying, which is like actually going into obesity now, is a lot of people don't even understand what's in their food because they don't cook. Yeah. So when I tell people, you realise that a cake is a third fat, a third sugar, and this is all fine in moderation, by the way. I'm not saying nobody should have cake ever again, that they can't get over it. Yeah. And they don't understand because they don't cook.
It's very tricky. We hear, related to gut microbiome, we hear of things like digestive enzymes, probiotics tell us why are they important? What do they do?
Yeah, so digestive enzymes, do you mean in terms of supplements?
Yeah, like supplements to, if people are having problems with the gut and the gut microbiome, well, that's what they've put it down to, but we know it's sleep. What's the story with supplements and actually trying to make those changes with supplements?
Okay, so first of all, supplements are only going to make marginal differences if you need them. So, and I know this is really negative because everyone wants to be able to tell me what supplement's going to change my life. It will make marginal differences. Some people do need them. So digestive enzymes, you'll often see them in the shop. You think, oh, I've got a digestive problem, therefore it makes sense. Oh, I'll go and get a digestive enzyme. But really, it's not going to make any difference at all. This has actually been proven in research. If you take a general enzyme, it's not going to work. And the reason is because enzymes are very specific. So if you're taking something like protease and amylase, which I'm not going to go into the words and techniques, but it's just random ones, what are you even trying to do? You've got to know what your problem is and what you're trying to top up in for enzymes. So for example, lactose intolerance is probably one that they could use an enzyme in, because they know that their issue is they don't produce enough lactase. So they can simply eat their dairy if they wanted to, or if they're not going to go vegan milks, and take a lactase enzyme to top up what they're not producing.
Yeah.
But just taking random enzymes is not going to do anything. And a lot of them actually have enzymes which are produced by your pancreas. If your pancreas wasn't working, you'd be dead.
Right.
It's not, you don't need them. Maybe placebo, but there isn't really any kind of benefit in
It's like taking a multivitamin.
Exactly, yeah. Expensive pee. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it has to be a lot more specific. Probiotics, again, are really specific. Even if you go into pharmacy and ask them, they'll have no idea. They'll have them on the shelf. They've probably been sat outside in 35-degree heat, so probably dead already. You need to be very specific. So we know that probiotics have got something called strain specificity, if we get that word out. But they're strain specific, which means that you have to, if you've got diarrhea, you need to take a probiotic strain, which has specifically been shown to help with that specific symptom, rather than just taking a random probiotic. Again, it might work just by chance, but unlikely. We've actually seen it. There's one called Biocol, which actually helps with IBS-D, so diarrhea dominant, but doesn't do anything for IBS-C. So it's down to that, yeah. And if you don't have a problem, probiotics have been shown not to make any difference. So you can save your money.
I was going to say, go back to what you said a couple of minutes ago. Yeah. It's an expensive way. We've spoken about stress. We've spoken about sleep, which is also stress affecting the gut. One or two other things. One thing that is really prevalent here is heat. And we're now into a warmer part of the year. Talk to us about the impact of heat on our gut and what we can expect to potentially see on the other end or feel.
Yeah, so heat can impact us in multiple different ways, I think mentally and physiologically as well. So with heat, the first thing, which is probably the easiest and most obvious, is dehydration. So a lot of people don't realise that they actually need more fluid. And when you look at all the fluid requirements, even if you're working with maybe a coach online who doesn't live here, they don't have any understanding of how hot it gets here. Your fluid requirement in January is going to be very different to what it is in June, July, August as we go through the hotter months. So what you can do is work out what your baseline is, and then you can look at just like your urine. Is it dark or is it like a straw colour, which, you know, it should be just some colour in it. But if it's really dark, then you need to up your hydration. If you're exercising, again, when you look at general recommendations, it gives you very different recommendations for using electrolytes. But actually here, you're sweating so much more throughout the day. A lot of us are also in AC, so we think that it's not an issue, but air conditioning day and night, that dehydrates us as well. So we need to really think about that. And then in terms of the gut, it can cause a variety of issues. And it's hard to know exactly because UAE is such a unique environment here that people actually inhabit, that we live here in these really high. So there's not a lot of research specifically in this exact heat. However, we know that it can cause looser stools, it can cause abdominal pain, it can cause bloating. And again, it won't be in everybody. It's just people who maybe got a slightly more sensitive gut. So it's just looking out for those things. Do go to your doctor just to check it's nothing else. But it might well be that you might not tolerate mental stress as much, for example, because the stress and the heat together is not going to be good. So it's really looking at potentially adjusting your lifestyle throughout the summer months, being a bit more realistic with exercise. Like, do you really need to be doing like your personal bests over the summer, or can you actually change that? I've actually worked with triathletes before and they're getting up at 3 a.m. to train. through the summer. And, you know, dedicated as they are, some of these people, they're not going to be doing this as a profession. So I think at some point you've got to ask yourself, what are your health goals as well? And then heat wise as well, which people don't really realise, is maybe even for some people being cooped up inside can impact them mentally quite a bit, and that might impact their gut sort of indirectly as well.
So yeah, mental stress from being cooped up inside is actually hurting the gut a bit.
Yeah,
I definitely find, and we work with a lot of endurance athletes, and I see it in myself over the summer months. You're right, you've got two things. You're having to wake up earlier, which is causing increased stress. Not everyone is sleeping less, because generally, well, personally anyway, I'll go to bed earlier, so I'll still make sure I sleep a lot. But waking your body up at 3:30 is causing stress, and then the heat. So by the afternoon, my gut is noticeably more swollen in the summer months than it is in winter.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like, how much do you want to tolerate it, basically?
Exactly. And at the end of the day, we're all adults. So I'm not here on this podcast to be like, don't ever do this. It's just about being aware, and then you can make that decision, you know, whatever is appropriate for you.
It's tricky. Endurance is tricky as well. It's quite funny. We should have with our endurance guys, we should have a roundtable discussion of gut and wind post heavy training sessions and lay it all out, because there's probably a lot there that people are like, this endurance makes me fart so much. And I'm like, I mean, it does me. I'll be straight up. It you know, if I've been out in the heat for a long time, you know, and sometimes I've thought it's the nutrition that I've taken during what I've done. Sometimes I've thought it's hydration, and it could have been sometimes, but sometimes it's just the heat has, because it affects, and there's quite a few studies about the impact of heat, not tested in the environment here, but heat generally on endurance athletes and performance. So,
and it's difficult, very difficult to manage everything. And also age comes into it as well. So it's a lot of, I'm not sure if you've read the same studies, but a lot of the endurance stuff is done in like people who are really young, in their prime, professional athletes. So can we translate that to people doing it for hobby or not? And it's just tricky, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's where I think it's interesting, because a lot of the sort of supplement companies, people that are providing electrolytes, which, you know, in this environment are great, and people probably should be having them, as shouldn't be replacing water with them, but they should be having them. A lot of their research is based on professionals of, like you said, 25 years old. And it's like, well, you're a 40-year-old guy who's worked 60 hours a week in a super stressful job. The studies is slightly different.
Exactly.
You mentioned types of diet. We've almost been through, and we cycle them, don't we? We're like vegan, yes, vegan, no. Vegetarian, yes, vegetarian, no. Paleo, yes, paleo, no. There's all sorts of, you know, low carb, high carb, I don't know what. What's your 10 cents on it all?
I don't think there's any diet that comes close to the Mediterranean diet. From the research I've seen. And also I think we've got to realise it's all in moderation. So anyone who puts themselves on a diet straight away might find that they're not always on that diet for very long. So it's got to be something that's sustainable. And then you've got to always think about that person personally, because everybody is different. And I know not everyone is going to be a dietitian to have that level of understanding, but you can be realistic. So just think about where you're at now. What changes could you make? And really, if any diet is really taking out a whole food group, that's probably what I'd be more worried about. And it really is in moderation. So if anything is demonizing, you can never have ice cream ever again, or you think you're going to go from brunching every weekend to never drinking again, probably not going to happen. And typically people then yo-yo quite crazy back the other way. So all in moderation.
What do you mean by Mediterranean diet for folks that have never heard that phrase before?
Yeah, so Mediterranean diet is based on multiple studies that show that people in the Mediterranean, probably maybe not now so much, but like historically definitely, their risk of inflammatory conditions like heart disease, diabetes, cancer, like the big inflammatory conditions are lower, and even also depression, dementia are lower, based on the diet that they have. So it is very plant-based. So not vegan, plant, which often gets misunderstood, but plant-based.
Completely misunderstood.
Plant-based, which means that your diet is full of different plants and vegetables, whole grains, nuts, seeds, lean meats, and then also oily fish as well. So good variety, but really coming from mostly those foods which contain those single ingredients.
So it's paleo. You told me you don't like paleo. It's basically paleo.
It is. And do you know, I don't really have a huge problem with paleo. My issue is more the grains that's missing from it.
You want us to eat grains?
Yes.
Why?
Just because, so if a client comes to me and they're obsessed, they want to be on the paleo diet and that's for them, it's probably not going to be in the top 10 things that I would want them to change. You know, it's not that big a concern. But the issue I have is if we're taking out a whole food group like the grains, it's not really even a whole food group, your other carbs in there, the opportunity to get those different plant varieties in, it goes down. Because suddenly we're not getting any bulgur wheat, quinoa, wheat even. And also, I don't know how realistic it is for some people. There is benefits of taking grains. So to me, it's just sort of on balance, the research for and against. I'm struggling to see any research for doing it. And it could potentially be quite tricky for some people and potentially make their gut worse. By how much? I'm not sure. It's a bit like people who want to avoid gluten for absolutely no reason. Actually, even as long
I've
as
seen it in social media, mate.
Do you know how painful that is? I'm actually celiac, and I'm sitting there going, "You don't have to eat this crap. I have to eat it." But even with someone who wants to eat gluten-free, we know they don't need to do it. But as a dietitian, as long as they're having a varied diet, they're eating other things, is it really doing them that much harm? So it is all on the balance.
That's marketing as well, isn't it?
Yes, very clever.
Low-cal, gluten-free, sugar-free. You know, okay, we'll take out sugar and we'll put in stevia.
Yep. Or what about all the diabetics who used to get referred with diarrhea? Because they would, instead of changing the diet, this is a long time ago when I worked in hospital wards, they would eat boxes of diabetic chocolate, taking on sugar out, put sweeteners in.
That's right.
And it's got a laxative effect. So they don't I think this person, maybe they've got an infection or something going on. I see them perfectly well just having diarrhea.
Unbelievable.
Yep.
Yeah, I remember diabetic chocolate. Amazing. You must enjoy like going back to Japanese diet because they still have grains in that.
Exactly, varied. It's almost like the Mediterranean diet. In Mediterranean diet, sort of starting with that to answer your question, it's not just you don't have to only eat those foods because we can actually translate it into different languages, different cultures. Like if you look at the Japanese, they are having all those things as well. Different vegetables, different fruits, different grains, a lot of omega-3 as well, and their sushis and things. So they're doing essentially the Mediterranean diet, albeit not Mediterranean foods, but the concepts are the same.
It's the same. Some cultures like to eat food groups in certain orders. Mainly, I think it's macronutrients, not micronutrients. What's your thoughts on that? And there's been some... I've had a few people in the last year or so eating carbs last.
Yeah, it doesn't really make much difference. It confuses me as a dietitian when I first came to the Middle East because but they were having salad with all their meals and it was a different meal and it was tiny, you know, and the main course was the meat and then the big plate of rice.
Yeah.
But in terms of nutrition, it doesn't make a lot of difference because as long as you're getting enough vegetables, enough carbohydrates, and at the end of the day some protein, in whatever order they come, it doesn't make a huge difference. But it is making sure you're getting enough. So if you're filling up on all your carbohydrates, you're definitely not going to be getting enough fiber or vitamins. And equally, if you're going to sit and have a huge steak every night, then you're going to end up constipated and with other problems. So it's just about the overall balance.
Yeah, I think some of it is around blood sugar levels because of obviously companies come with these glucose monitors, which I'm sure you love as well, right?
No, it is so. I can't say the name for legal reasons, but I did get asked to promote, and this just shows the difference for the health professional to an influencer. I got asked to promote one of them for a lot of money to be wearing them, and the actual science they use is based on diabetics who can't control the blood sugars. Yeah. So even if the average person had a huge slice of cake, all that sugar in it, obviously we don't want to be doing it every day. But yes, your blood sugars would go really high. And guess what? Your body would produce insulin and bring it back down again. So again, going back to there are some people genuinely wanting to do things for their health. And then they go down that rabbit hole because they're given all this clever marketing. and information, which sounds really scientific-y and fancy. And I think what dietitians are saying is quite boring, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it is. Absolutely. And it's consistent as well, because the way that, for example, you've been educated at university is the right way, and it's been taught like that for a number of years based on a lot of, hopefully, and we believe, good scientific studies, whereas anyone has a scientific study these days, and the sample populations are very small, and everyone wants to sell something. And humans, what are we, like neophobes? We like new things. So if there's a new tracking ring or something, we like it. We like to try it. That releases dopamine. It excites us. And that's why I think always when people come with something new, I think there's a massive benefit at the same time, because they have a new level of motivation around something. I know it's going to make no difference. I've watched these glucose monitors closely, and I've watched trackers super closely. And I have some clients that have used them for a number of years, and they know exactly the problem, but we're still trying to work to unearth it. So yeah, it's...
This is why I stopped using my Whoop band.
Yeah, Whoop's a great one, isn't it?
Well, it was useful, but it told me that my sleep was bad and I wasn't ignoring it, basically. So for X amount of money per year, I was like, okay, no, I know. I'm still going to go and train, and I shouldn't be doing it.
It's tricky, but you're wearing it. You've got a young child. Of course, sometimes your sleep's not great. The anxiety, the number of people that I see wearing Whoop that are actually anxious from wearing it. This fucking thing tells me I'm not recovering. Calm down. You have quite smartly brought together all of your thoughts in a book for us to bring it all together. What inspired you to write a book?
There's a missing link. So people have these digestive problems. We know at least 1 in 10 people have got IBS. More than that have got 30% of the population think they have a food intolerance, etc. A lot of people just think they should be on some sort of diet. The problem is it goes to the doctor, tests come back negative, and there's no next step. And the only next step is really probably to see a dietitian who's specialist in that. So that's already a niche. And also it costs a lot of money. Some people can't access that. So it was the missing link for what people needed, just to bring it all together. And it goes back to what you said before. It's really overwhelming. If we tell someone you need to change your nutrition and your movement and your sleep and your mental health, where do you start with that? So it was really a way to bring all the science together, but in a very step-by-step format that's tangible. So people can make those small changes that are specific to them that make a big difference over time, really.
What was the most challenging thing about writing a book?
I was probably a little bit of fear of what people were going to say, because I hate a lot of the, I guess, alternative testing that's out there. And so it's been okay in the UK, but it's about to hit US in July. And the US is a different kettle of fish when it comes to functional medicine doctors and various other bits. So probably to see the feedback from that, but that's also what I want. I want the conversation to be out there. I want to be like, well, actually, this is what the science shows. You shouldn't be promoting this. Yeah. That's probably the biggest fear, but also I knew that it was a conversation that had to be kind of stirred a little bit.
Do you think we'll get to a point where the approach that you've suggested over the last hour is quite holistic? It's like, guys, just slow down a little bit. Let's look at, it's not just what's going in. Let's make sure that that's good. But what I'm hearing is, let's look at your lifestyle as well. Well, that's what we really heard in the first 15 minutes of the show. But we also talked about big brands and marketing taking over. My question is, will we get to a point of where logic prevails, and we know that big brands are big brands and they've got lots of money and they can brainwash us and spend billions on social media ads, and we'll actually go, those guys that did that show, that InnerFight podcast, let's go back to them because they spoke. Will we get to that point, do you think?
It's already starting to happen. So there are brands, I can't name them, but there's certain brands who are linked to influencers, and it's actually burnt them. long term. So they've got laws in place, they're changing their messaging, they're very specific. They don't want to be involved with any kind of like broad things or anything that's not accurate. And they're also looking to work with those registered health professionals rather than people that can't be trusted. So I was recently approached by a company, and they didn't even want me to promote the company. They just wanted me to do nutrition videos because they wanted to be associated with a dietitian talking about health in a trusted way. So it is already starting to happen. So I think the brands are maybe not for the right ethical reasons, but they're starting to see their finances go down because maybe people are starting to get switched on that this is a load of nonsense. And they do need to take a bit more of a holistic approach and science-backed. But yeah, it is already starting to happen. But it'll be interesting to see if it happens in the US, because definitely the European, UK market's different to what I'd say, and even the Australian market to what I'd say the US is.
So on that note, what are you most excited about in your work, in your career for the coming 5 years?
What a big question.
Yeah, it's huge.
So most excited, probably just to see the expansion of things. So my plan next is to actually go into digital healthcare.
Wow.
And to set up an app, which I thought I could do with about $10,000. Somebody laughed. It looks like hundreds of thousands. So that's my plan next, because again, going like the book, it reaches people. And so that's what I would be most excited to see, like something people can have in their pocket. People are excited because it's new, hopefully. But there's lots of apps out there already, and they haven't got the right people on board, so they don't quite work. So I can't wait to like actually get something that's like the go-to tech for people that really need the help as well. That would be what I'm excited to see.
When you do that, when you have an app live, we'll still be here, sat in these chairs with these mics. I'd love to talk about it more. It's awesome. Where should people head to get your book? Tell us where we can get in touch with you, Kirsten.
So the book can be bought in any major bookstore in the UK at the minute, or if you're in the UAE, Amazon. So it's called Take Control of Your IBS, the step-by-step guide that works. And then in terms of follow me, or if you've got any other, you want more content, is at the .ibs dietitian on Instagram.
Awesome. Very interesting topic. Very, I can imagine, interesting area to work on a daily basis. So good for you. And it's very refreshing to hear about a nice holistic sleep more and you'll fart less.
Yep. Summarized after
Maybe
an hour.
we could title this show that. Thank you so much for coming on. That was cool.
Thank you so much for having me.